A tale of betrayal. I'm throwing this out here because I feel like I'm about to explode. I never thought I'd be the guy posting a story like this, but here I am. I'm married to my wife, Lisa, for 22 years. We have 2 grown kids, a nice house, and what I thought was a decent marriage. Sure, we've had ups and downs like everyone else, but I honestly believe we were happy. I was wrong. For context, Lisa and I met in our late 20s. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room. Beautiful, confident, and sharp-tongued in a way that I found both infuriating and intoxicating. She always had a strong personality, but over the years, that strength turned into something sharper, more biting. I chalked it up to stress or just the natural ebb and flow of long-term relationships. I never imagined she'd take things to this level. The first signs of trouble were subtle. She started working late more often, claiming there was so much going on at the office. She's a manager at a small law firm, so it didn't seem strange at first. But then there were the little things. She'd get a text and smile in a way that felt private. She started dressing differently, skimpier dresses, lower-cut tops. At first, I thought she was just trying to feel sexy again, and I encouraged it. Hell, I even bought her a few outfits myself. But now I realize I was enabling her little fantasy world while I played the clueless husband. Then came the phone. Lisa used to leave her phone on the counter or the coffee table without a second thought. Now it's glued to her side. She started locking it, something she never bothered with before. When I asked about it, she rolled her eyes and said, "Jake, the world doesn't revolve around you. Some of us need a little privacy." Privacy, right? The final straw was the way she started treating me. One minute she'd be snapping at me over nothing. The next she'd be sweet as pie, like she was trying to make up for something. It felt off, like she was overcompensating. Still, I convinced myself I was imagining things. I trusted Lisa. We'd build a life together. I told myself she'd never betray me. I was an idiot. The unraveling began on a quiet Thursday night. Lisa had her usual late meeting at work, so I was home alone, flipping through the channels and feeling restless. Something about her behavior had been eating at me for weeks, and I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that something wasn't right. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I'm just being paranoid, I thought. But then I remembered the way she had snapped at me that morning when I'd asked her why she'd been so distant lately. "God, Jake, can you not suffocate me for 5 minutes?" she'd barked before slamming the front door. That wasn't my wife, not the Lisa I knew. I needed answers. That's when I decided to check our shared laptop. Lisa used it occasionally for work, and I thought maybe there'd be something there to ease my mind. I wasn't planning to snoop. I just wanted to reassure myself that everything was fine. But the moment I opened the browser, my heart sank. There, in the search history, were several visits to a cheap motel's website. Not once, not twice, 6 times. All within the last 2 months. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Lisa had no reason to be at a motel. None. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she'd been helping a coworker book a room. Maybe it wasn't even her search. Though that seemed unlikely, since she was the only other person who used the laptop. Still, I wanted to believe there was a logical reason for it. But then I saw the email. Lisa must have forgotten to log out of her account, because when I clicked on the browser's email tab, her inbox opened right up. The first thing I noticed was a message flagged with a red heart from someone named Tom S. The subject line? "Can't wait to see you tonight, face blowing a kiss." My hands were shaking as I clicked on it. The email was short but damning. "Tom, last night was incredible. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Same time tonight? I'll bring the wine this time. Face blowing a kiss. Lisa, you're insatiable, lol. Fine, but only for a little while. Jake's been nosy lately, and I don't want him getting suspicious." The room spun around me as I read her words. Nosy? Suspicious? She was treating me like I was some gullible idiot while she was out screwing around with this guy. I sat there in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity. My first instinct was to drive straight to her office and confront her. But then I realized she's not at the office. She's with him. I needed proof. I wasn't going to let her gaslight me or twist the story when I confronted her. I grabbed my keys and drove toward the motel I'd seen in the search history. It was a rundown place on the edge of town, the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour. My stomach churned as I pulled into the parking lot and scanned the rows of cars. And then I saw it. Her car, parked in the far corner. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I wanted to burst in there, to drag her out and demand answers. But instead, I sat there, paralyzed by a mix of rage and heartbreak. A few minutes later, the door to one of the rooms opened. Lisa stepped out, her hair tousled and her blouse wrinkled. She was laughing, her hand resting on the arm of a tall, muscular man I assumed was Tom. He leaned down to kiss her, and she kissed him back, her fingers lingering on his chest. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I drove home and waited. When she walked through the door an hour later, she was all smiles, acting like she'd just come from a long, grueling day at work. "How was your night?" she asked casually, dropping her purse on the counter. I forced a smile. "Uneventful," I said, my voice strained. I couldn't let her know what I'd seen. Not yet. The morning after I saw Lisa with Tom S., I could barely look at her. She sat across the breakfast table, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened, humming softly to herself. It made my skin crawl. I had to remind myself to breathe. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw the evidence in her face and watch her squirm. But I knew better. Lisa was sharp, quick on her feet, and an expert manipulator. If I didn't come prepared, she'd twist the narrative and turn the blame on me. So I waited. That evening, after dinner, I told her we needed to talk. She groaned like a teenager being asked to clean their room. "Can this wait, Jake? I am exhausted. It's been a day." "No," I said firmly. "It can't." She sighed dramatically, setting her wine glass down. "Fine. What is it this time?" I stared at her for a moment, trying to gauge her reaction. "Where were you last night?" She blinked, caught off guard by the directness of my question. "At work," she said, her tone impatient. "I told you. We had a late meeting." "Really?" I said, leaning forward. "Because I was near the motel on Route 9 last night, and I'm pretty sure I saw your car there." Her face froze for a split second, just long enough for me to see the panic flash in her eyes. But she recovered quickly, plastering on a confused smile. "A motel? Are you serious right now, Jake? You've been acting paranoid for weeks, but this is a new low." I held up my phone, showing her a picture I'd taken of her car in the motel parking lot. "Explain this, Lisa." Her smile faltered. She opened her mouth, then closed it, scrambling for an answer. Finally, she scoffed. "That's not my car." "Bullshit," I snapped, slamming the phone down on the table. "Don't lie to me, Lisa. I saw you. I saw you with him." Her eyes narrowed, the sweetness in her voice replaced with venom. "So you've been spying on me now? Jesus, Jake. Do you hear yourself? You're acting like a lunatic." "Don't turn this around on me," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I have the emails, Lisa. The ones from Tom. You know, the guy who thinks you're insatiable." Her jaw dropped, but she quickly snapped it shut. "You went to my emails? That's a massive invasion of privacy, Jake." "Privacy?" I shouted. "You're lecturing me about privacy while you're screwing some guy behind my back?" She stood up, crossing her arms defensively. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she said coldly. "If you're going to act like this, maybe I don't want to fix this." "Fix this?" I laughed bitterly. "There's nothing to fix, Lisa. You broke it. You destroyed it. And for what? Some cheap thrill in a motel room?" Her face twisted with anger. "You don't understand what it's like, Jake. You've been so checked out for years. Do you even remember the last time you made me feel special? The last time you touched me like I mattered? You still here? Stunned. So, this is my fault now? You're blaming me for your affair? Maybe if you'd been a better husband, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere," she snapped. Her words hit me like a slap to the face. My hands clenched in a fist at my sides, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. When I finally found my voice, it was cold and steady. "Get out," I said. Her eyes widened. "What?" "You heard me," I said. "Get out. Pack a bag. Go to your boyfriend's place. Go to hell. I don't care. But you're not staying here." "You're being ridiculous," she said, her voice trembling. "No, Lisa. What's ridiculous is that you think you can cheat on me, lie to my face, and then blame me for your mistakes. So, let me make this clear. We're done." She glared at me. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine," she spat. "You want me to leave? I'll leave. But don't come crying to me when you realize how much you've thrown away." "I'm not the one who threw it away," I said, my voice calm but icy. Without another word, she stormed upstairs to pack a bag. I sat on the couch, my heart pounding as I listened to her footsteps thudding overhead. A part of me wanted to stop her, to beg her to stay and work things out. But the rest of me, the part that had seen the emails, the motel, her with him, knew it was over. When Lisa slammed the front door behind her, the house fell into a silence so thick it was almost unbearable. For the first time in over 2 decades, I was completely alone. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I had no idea who I was without her. At first, the anger kept me going. I replayed her words over and over in my head, fueling my rage. Maybe if you'd been a better husband. The sheer audacity of her trying to pin this on me was almost laughable. Almost. But as the hours dragged on, the anger began to fade, replaced by something heavier. Sadness. Grief. We'd been married for 22 years. We'd raised kids together, built a life, shared memories. And now, all of it felt tainted like a lie. I spent that first night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, too numb to sleep. My mind kept flashing back to the motel, to her laughing and kissing him like she didn't have a care in the world. How long had I been living in this fantasy where we were happy? How much of our marriage had been a sham? The next day, the reality of what had happened began to sink in. Lisa was gone, not just for the night, but for good. The house felt empty in a way that was hard to describe. Her clothes were still in the closet, her shampoo still in the shower, but her presence was missing. I kept expecting her to walk through the door with one of her snarky comments or a list of things she needed me to do. But she didn't. I went through the motions, trying to keep myself busy. I cleaned the house, went for a long drive, even called Mike, my best friend, to let him know what was going on. "Lisa," he said when I told him, "I never liked her, man. You know that. But I didn't think she had it in her to do something like this." "Yeah, well, apparently she's been full of surprises," I said bitterly. "You want me to come over?" he offered. "We can grab a drink, talk things out." "No," I said, shaking my head even though he couldn't see me. "I think I just need to be alone for a bit." "All right," he said. "But you call me if you need anything, okay? And Jake, don't let her make you think this was your fault." That night, I finally broke down. It started small, just a lump in my throat as I washed the dishes. But before I knew it, I was sobbing into my hands, my shoulders shaking as years of frustration, heartbreak, and betrayal poured out of me. I thought about our wedding day, how beautiful she looked walking down the aisle. I thought about the night our first child was born, how we cried together as we held him in our arms. I thought about all the little moments, the Sunday mornings in bed, the inside jokes, the way she used to look at me like I was her whole world. Where had it all gone wrong? Over the next few days, I started piecing together the timeline in my head. The emails I found dated back at least 6 months, but I had a gut feeling this had been going on for longer. I couldn't stop wondering. Why him? Was he younger? More successful? Better in bed? The questions gnawed at me, eroding what little self-esteem I had left. But then I remembered something my dad used to say. When someone betrays you, it says more about them than it does about you. Lisa's betrayal wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of her selfishness, her inability to communicate, her unwillingness to work on our marriage. That thought became my anchor, the thing I clung to whenever the grief threatened to pull me under. One morning, as I sat at the kitchen table drinking my coffee, I realized I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. Lisa had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I woke up one morning, about a week after Lisa had left, with a clarity I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. I was done wallowing in grief, done being the victim. She thought she could destroy 22 years of marriage and walk away scot-free? No. If Lisa wanted to play dirty, I'd show her how it's done. But first, I needed to prepare. I wasn't about to make any rash moves. I wanted everything planned down to the last detail. I spent hours researching, talking to a lawyer, and going over our finances. If Lisa thought she was getting half of everything without a fight, she had another thing coming. Step 1 was to document everything. I printed out the emails between her and Tom, including the one where she'd mocked me for being nosy. I pulled bank statements showing the withdrawals she'd made on our joint account, money she'd probably spent on hotel rooms and wine with her lover. Step 2 was to set the trap. Lisa had a habit of underestimating me, of thinking I was too soft to stand up for myself. That was her first mistake. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Lisa called me one afternoon, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "Jake, I think we need to talk about the house," she said. "What about it?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Well," she said, dragging the word out, "I think it's only fair that we sell it and split the profits. I mean, we both put so much into it, right?" I bit back a laugh. She hadn't put so much into anything. I'd paid for the house, maintained it, and handled every major repair, while she redecorated it every few years like it was her personal Pinterest board. "You're right," I said, keeping my voice calm. "We should talk. Why don't you come by tomorrow? I'll make some coffee, and we can figure things out." The next day, Lisa walked into the house like she owned the place. She was dressed to the nines, wearing a tight skirt and a low-cut blouse that screamed, "Look at me." It was the same outfit she'd worn on her last work dinner, and I couldn't help but wonder if Tom had picked it out for her. "Nice to see you, too," I said dryly as she strutted into the living room. "Let's just get this over with," she said, sitting down and crossing her legs. "I have plans tonight." I smiled, though it didn't reach my eyes. "Of course you do." I handed her a folder, the same one I'd spent the last week compiling. She opened it, her expression shifting from smug to horrified as she flipped through the contents. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, her voice rising. "It's proof," I said simply. "Proof of your affair. Proof of the money you spent on hotel rooms. Proof that you lied to my face for months." Her face turned red. "You had no right to go through my private emails. And you had no right to screw around on me," I shot back. "But here we are." I leaned forward, looking her straight in the eye. "Here's how this is going to go, Lisa. You're going to sign over your share of the house to me. In exchange, I won't send these emails to everyone at your office or to Tom's wife. Sound fair?" Her mouth fell open. "You wouldn't. Try me," I said, my voice ice cold. She sputtered, trying to regain control of the conversation. "You're being ridiculous, Jake. Do you have any idea what this will do to me? My career? My reputation?" "Oh, I have a pretty good idea," I said, leaning back in my chair. "But then again, maybe you should have thought about that before you started sleeping with your coworker." Her eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I said, pulling out my phone, "because it would take me about 30 seconds to email this to every one of your colleagues." She stared at me, her hands shaking. For a moment, I thought she might call my bluff, but then she sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "I'll sign the papers." Watching her scribble her name on the documents was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. When she was done, she shoved the folder back at me, glaring daggers. "I hope you're happy," she spat. "Oh, I'm getting there," I said with a smirk. After she stormed out, I poured myself a whiskey and sat back, savoring the victory. It wasn't just about the house. It was about reclaiming my power, my dignity. Lisa had taken me for a fool, but I wasn't about to let her walk away without consequences. And as for Tom, I had plans for him too. The satisfaction of reclaiming the house was a good start, but it wasn't enough. Lisa thought she could waltz out of our marriage, play victim, and continue her little fantasy life with Tom? Not on my watch. For years, I'd been the quiet, dependable husband, the guy who always took the high road. But after everything Lisa had done, I was ready to take the gloves off. The first step was Tom. From the emails and the breadcrumbs Lisa had left behind, it wasn't hard to track him down. A quick search revealed he was married with 2 kids and lived a couple of towns over. His wife, Sarah, was an elementary school teacher, judging by her Facebook profile. Innocent, sweet-looking, the exact opposite of the sleaze she was married to. I debated whether to involve her, knowing it would shatter her life as much as mine had been shattered. But in the end, I decided she deserved the truth. Lisa and Tom had banked on everyone staying quiet. That ends now. I drafted an email, attaching the most damning screenshots I had of their correspondence. The motel dates, the raunchy messages, even a few LOL Jake has no idea comments that still made my blood boil. Subject line, you deserve to know. Body, I know this is going to be a difficult email to read, but I believe you deserve to know the truth about your husband, Tom. He has been having an affair with my wife, Lisa, for at least 6 months. I've attached proof. I'm sorry you had to go through this, but I thought you should know. Best, Jake. I hit send and sat back, my heart pounding. A part of me felt bad for dragging Sarah into this, but the other part, the part that had seen Lisa laughing in that motel parking lot, knew it was the right thing to do. 2 days later, Sarah called me. Her voice was shaky but resolute. Jake, it's Sarah, Tom's wife. I'm so sorry, I said immediately. I know this isn't easy. No, thank you, she interrupted. Thank you for telling me. I had my suspicions, but I didn't have any proof. Now I do. Her calmness surprised me. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm filing for divorce, she said without hesitation. Tom's been lying to me for years, and this is the final straw. I'm done. Hearing her resolve gave me strength. If she could move forward, so could I. But I wasn't done yet. I knew Lisa and Tom had been flaunting their affair at work, thinking no one would catch on. I couldn't let them get away with that, either. I sent an anonymous tip to their HR department, detailing their inappropriate relationship and attaching the same screenshots I'd sent to Sarah. I didn't care if it made me petty. Actions have consequences, and they needed to learn that the hard way. The fallout was swift. Within a week, Lisa called me, her voice frantic. Jake, what the hell did you do? Me? I said innocently. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't play dumb, she snapped. Tom and I both got called into HR today. They're investigating us for an inappropriate workplace relationship. Do you realize what this could do to my career? I couldn't help but laugh. Oh, you mean the career you were so worried about when you were sneaking off to motels with your coworker? That career? You're such an asshole, she hissed. No, Lisa, I said, my tone icy. I'm just finally standing up for myself. Enjoy the consequences. I hung up before she could respond. The fallout didn't end there. Word spread quickly through Lisa's office, and it wasn't long before her late meetings became the punchline of every joke in the break room. Tom didn't fare much better. Sarah kicked him out of the house, and from what I heard through the grapevine, he was crashing on a friend's couch. As for me, I felt like I could finally breathe again. For years, I'd been the guy who avoided conflict, who let things slide for the sake of keeping the peace. But not anymore. Lisa and Tom had underestimated me, and now they were paying the price. Revenge wasn't pretty, but damn, it was satisfying. After the fallout, life felt strangely quiet. Lisa was out of my life, her affair exposed, and her little fantasy world crashing down around her. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't walking on eggshells or pretending everything was fine. But with the silence came something I hadn't expected, the weight of my own emotions. Revenge had been satisfying, no doubt. Watching Lisa scramble and Tom's life implode had given me a sense of justice. But now that the chaos was over, I was left with myself, my anger, my grief, my questions. It was like standing in the aftermath of a storm, staring at the wreckage and wondering where to even begin rebuilding. I started small. One morning, I cleaned out the bedroom. Lisa's clothes were still in the closet, her makeup scattered across the vanity, her perfume lingering in the air. I packed everything into boxes, sealing them shut like I was locking away a part of my life I didn't need anymore. It hurt, though. Every piece of clothing, every photo, every trinket felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of the life we'd shared and the betrayal that had shattered it. But I kept going, box by box, until the room felt like mine again. The next step was therapy. Mike suggested it one night over beers, and at first I brushed him off. I don't need therapy, I said, taking a swig of my drink. I'm fine. You're not fine, Jake, he said bluntly. You just blew up your marriage and exposed your wife's affair. Don't get me wrong, it was badass. But now you've got to deal with the fallout. Don't do it alone. He was right. As much as I hated to admit it, I wasn't fine. I felt like a part of me had been ripped out, and I didn't know how to put it back. So, I found a therapist, someone who specialized in relationships and trauma, and made an appointment. Therapy was hard at first. Talking about my feelings wasn't exactly my strong suit, and reliving the betrayal felt like reopening old wounds. But over time, it started to help. My therapist helped me unpack not just Lisa's betrayal, but also the way I had let myself shrink in the marriage. How I had put her needs above mine, ignored my own gut instincts, and allowed her to chip away at my self-worth. Lisa's actions say more about her than they do about you, she told me during one session. You can't control what she did, but you can control how you respond and how you move forward. Those words became my mantra. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape my future. One day, I found myself looking through old photos, vacations, birthdays, holidays with Lisa and the kids. At first, it felt like a mistake, like I was torturing myself. But then I realized something. Not all of those memories were bad. There were moments of happiness, moments where we truly loved each other. And that was okay. I didn't need to erase those memories. I just needed to put them in their place. As I worked through my emotions, I started to rediscover parts of myself I'd forgotten. I joined a local hiking group, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the time for. I picked up woodworking, turning my garage into a workshop where I could create instead of dwell. And I reconnected with old friends, people Lisa had pushed away because she didn't like them or didn't see the value in them. For the first time in years, I was living for myself, and it felt damn good. I won't pretend it was easy. There were nights when the loneliness hit me hard, when I missed the comfort of having someone beside me, even if that someone had betrayed me. But those moments became fewer and farther between. Slowly, I was healing. One evening, I got a text from Sarah, Tom's ex-wife. Sarah, hey, just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. Hope things are looking up. I smiled and typed back. Thanks, Sarah. Doing better every day. Hope you're doing well, too. We ended up talking for a while, sharing updates about our lives and laughing about how far we'd come. She was moving on, too, stronger, wiser, and happier without Tom weighing her down. It felt good to connect with someone who truly understood what I'd been through. Revenge had been cathartic, but healing was where I found peace. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't defined by what had happened to me. I was more than Lisa's husband, more than a betrayed spouse. I was Jake, a man who had been through hell and come out stronger on the other side. As the weeks turned into months, the dark cloud that had been hanging over me began to lift. The anger and sadness that had consumed me started to fade, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild my life. Lisa's betrayal had been a devastating blow, but it didn't define me. I was finally ready to look forward instead of back. One of the first things I did was put the house on the market. As much as I had fought to keep it during the divorce, it no longer felt like home. It was too full of memories, too haunted by what had happened. Selling it felt like shedding old skin, a chance to start fresh somewhere new. Finding a new place was an adventure in itself. I ended up buying a small but cozy cabin about an hour outside the city. It was surrounded by woods, with a big porch where I could sit and drink my coffee in the mornings, listening to the birds. It was quiet, peaceful, and entirely mine. The cabin also gave me the perfect space for my new hobby, woodworking. I'd started small, making simple things like shelves and picture frames, but as I got more confident, I moved on to bigger projects. There was something incredibly satisfying about creating something with my own hands, turning raw materials into something beautiful and functional. It felt like a metaphor for my life, taking the broken pieces and building something new. During this time, I also started saying yes to things I never would have considered before. When Mike invited me on a fishing trip with some of his buddies, I didn't hesitate. When my hiking group organized a weekend camping trip, I packed my bag and joined them. Each new experience felt like a step away from the past and toward the person I wanted to become. One day, while grabbing coffee at a local cafe, I bumped into someone who turned my world upside down in the best possible way. Her name was Rachel, and she was different. She wasn't flashy or dramatic like Lisa had been. She was warm, kind, and grounded. We started talking, first about the coffee, then about everything else. Rachel was a widow, having lost her husband 5 years ago, and she understood what it meant to rebuild your life after losing someone you loved. There was an ease to our conversations, a natural connection that felt almost too good to be true. We started seeing each other casually. Long walks in the woods, dinners at small, quiet restaurants, late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours of the morning. It wasn't about filling a void or rushing into something new. It was about companionship, about finding joy in someone else's presence. Rachel also helped me see things in a new light. "What Lisa did to you was terrible," she said one night as we sat by the fire in my cabin. "But it doesn't have to define you. You're more than her betrayal." Her words struck a chord. For so long, I had let Lisa's actions overshadow everything else in my life. But Rachel was right. Lisa was a chapter in my story, not the whole book. Meanwhile, I stayed in touch with Sarah, Tom's ex-wife. She'd moved back to her hometown and started teaching at a new school. Every so often, we'd check in on each other, sharing updates and words of encouragement. "I heard Lisa got transferred to another office," Sarah said during one of our calls. "Guess she couldn't handle the gossip." I laughed. "Sounds about right. Good riddance." Sarah chuckled. "You're doing well, Jake. I'm glad to see it." "So are you," I replied. We both got out of bad situations, and were better for it. As time went on, I realized something important. Life doesn't end when someone betrays you. It hurts like hell, but it also opens the door for new opportunities, new connections, and new happiness. Lisa's betrayal had been the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it had also been a wake-up call. It forced me to reevaluate my life, to focus on myself, and to discover who I was outside of my marriage. And in doing so, I found a strength I didn't know I had. Rachel and I took things slow, but as the months passed, it became clear that what we had was something special. She wasn't a replacement for Lisa. She was something entirely new, entirely better. She didn't just fit into my life. She enhanced it. One night, as we sat under the stars, she took my hand and said, "You deserve to be happy, Jake. And I think you're finally getting there." For the first time, I believed her. As my relationship with Rachel deepened, I realized how different it felt compared to what I'd had with Lisa. There were no games, no hidden agendas, no walking on eggshells. Rachel didn't just make me feel loved, she made me feel seen. And after everything I'd been through, that was the greatest gift I could have asked for. Still, I knew I had to be cautious. I wasn't looking to repeat the mistakes of my past or rush into something I wasn't ready for. Rachel understood that. She wasn't pushing for anything more than I could give, and her patience gave me the space I needed to keep healing. One of the biggest milestones in my journey came when I decided to confront my lingering resentment toward Lisa. For months, I carried the weight of her betrayal like a boulder strapped to my chest. Even though I'd exacted my revenge and moved on in many ways, there was still a part of me that was angry. Angry at her. Angry at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. Angry at the universe for allowing it to happen. But holding on to that anger wasn't hurting Lisa. It was hurting me. One night, while sitting on the porch of my cabin, I wrote her a letter. Not to send, just to get everything off my chest. I wrote about the pain she'd caused, the trust she'd shattered, and the way her betrayal had forced me to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about love. But I also wrote about what I'd learned, how I'd grown, and how I was finally ready to let go of the bitterness that had been holding me back. When I was done, I burned the letter in the fire pit, watching the flames consume the words until there was nothing left but ash. It felt like closing a door I'd been too afraid to shut for months. Around the same time, I started focusing on mending my relationships with my kids. They were both adults now with lives of their own, but Lisa's betrayal had created a ripple effect that impacted them, too. My daughter, Emily, had been furious when she found out about the affair, calling Lisa to confront her in a heated phone call that ended with Emily cutting off contact. My son, Ryan, had been more reserved, but I could tell he was struggling to process everything. "I don't know how you dealt with it, Dad," Ryan said one evening as we sat by the fire pit. "I think I would have lost it." "It wasn't easy," I admitted. "But you don't have to let something like this define you. People will hurt you, Ryan. That's just life. But it's what you do afterward that matters." He nodded thoughtfully, and I felt a surge of pride. If nothing else, I wanted my kids to see that it was possible to rebuild after a betrayal, to rise from the ashes stronger than before. Rachel also encouraged me to reconnect with my passions. I started taking my woodworking more seriously, eventually setting up a small shop where I sold custom pieces to locals and online. It wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a way to channel my energy into something creative and fulfilling. One day, I finished a piece I was particularly proud of, a beautifully crafted bench made from reclaimed wood. Rachel ran her hand along the smooth surface, a smile spreading across her face. "This is incredible, Jake," she said. "You should be so proud." "Thanks," I said, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. "It's been a good outlet for me. Keeps me grounded." "And it shows," she said, her eyes sparkling. "You've come such a long way." I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I'd learned how to balance the pain of the past with the promise of the future, how to carry the lessons Lisa's betrayal had taught me without letting them weigh me down. I'd also learned to set boundaries, to recognize my own worth, and to prioritize my happiness. It wasn't always easy, but with Rachel's support and my own determination, I was finally starting to feel whole again. One evening, as Rachel and I were sitting on the couch watching a movie, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "What is it?" I asked. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Do you think you'll ever forgive Lisa?" The question caught me off guard, but I didn't need long to think about it. "I think I already have," I said. "Not for her sake, but for mine. Carrying that anger around, it's like drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick. Letting it go doesn't mean I condone what she did. It just means I'm done letting it control me." Rachel smiled, squeezing my hand. "You've grown so much, Jake. It's inspiring." Her words stayed with me long after the movie ended. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, on solid ground with a clear path ahead. The more I let go of the pain from Lisa's betrayal, the more room I found for the things that truly mattered. Life began to feel like a blank canvas, and I was finally holding the brush. I had no intention of rushing into anything. I was savoring the freedom of shaping my days however I wanted. Rachel and I continued to grow closer, but it wasn't the kind of suffocating, all-consuming relationship I'd had with Lisa. With Rachel, everything felt balanced. She encouraged me to be myself, to chase my passions, and to speak my mind. She wasn't trying to mold me into something I wasn't. She was just there, a quiet, steady presence that made everything easier. One weekend, Rachel and I took a trip to a nearby national park. We hiked during the day, camped under the stars at night, and talked about everything, our pasts, our fears, our hopes for the future. "Do you think you'll ever get married again?" she asked one night as we sat by the campfire. I poked at the flames with a stick, thinking about her question. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm not opposed to it, but I don't want to force anything. If it happens, it happens." She nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I feel the same way. I just want something real, you know? No games, no expectations, just two people being honest with each other." I smiled, reaching for her hand. "I think we got a good start." When we got back from the trip, I felt lighter than I had in years. The cabin, which had once felt like a retreat from the chaos of my life, now felt like home. It wasn't just a place to escape. It was a place to live. I began to open myself up to new experiences, saying yes to things I never would have considered before. I started hosting small dinners with friends, inviting people over to share stories and laugh over good food. I even joined a local volunteer group that built furniture for underprivileged families. Through it all, Rachel was my biggest cheerleader, always encouraging me to push my limits and embrace the unknown. One afternoon, I got a call from Sarah, Tom's ex-wife. "I just wanted to thank you again," she said, "for telling me the truth. It's been a hard road, but I feel like I've finally got my life back." "I'm glad to hear that," I said sincerely. "You deserve it." "You do too, Jake," she said. "And I hope you know that." Her words stuck with me. For so long, I defined myself by what Lisa had done to me. But now, I was starting to see myself as more than just a betrayed husband. I was Jake, a man who had weathered the storm and come out stronger on the other side. One day, while working in my shop, I finished a piece that felt like a metaphor for my journey. It was a table made from salvaged wood, pieces that had been cracked, scarred, and seemingly useless. But with time and effort, I turned those broken pieces into something whole and beautiful. When Rachel saw it, she smiled and ran her hand along the surface. "This is incredible," she said. "You've got a real talent, Jake." "Thanks," I said, a warm feeling spreading through my chest. "It feels good to make something out of nothing." "You've done that with more than just this table," she said, her eyes meeting mine. I pulled her into a hug, realizing how true her words were. As the months passed, I continued to build my new life. I wasn't rushing into the future, but I wasn't stuck in the past either. I'd found a balance, one where I could honor the lessons I'd learned without letting them hold me back. Lisa had been a chapter in my story, but she wasn't the whole book. And for the first time, I was excited to see how the next chapters would unfold. As I settled into my new life, I realized something that I hadn't fully grasped before. Happiness wasn't something I had to chase or wait for. It was something I could create one small step at a time. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own happiness. The cabin had become my sanctuary, a place that truly reflected who I was now. Every corner of it held pieces of the new me. My woodworking projects, photos from hikes and adventures, even little touches that Rachel had added here and there. It wasn't just a house, it was a home. One of my proudest achievements was turning the garage into a proper woodworking studio. What had started as a hobby had grown into a side business. Orders started trickling in after I posted a few of my pieces online, and before long, I was getting requests for custom furniture. I'll never forget the first time someone messaged me saying, "Your work is exactly what I've been looking for." It felt like validation, not just for my craft, but for the effort I'd put into rebuilding my life. Rachel had become a constant presence, though we still kept things casual. She spent weekends at the cabin, helping me with projects or just lounging by the fire. She wasn't pushy or demanding, which was a breath of fresh air compared to what I'd been used to with Lisa. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees, Rachel turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about what's next for you?" I smiled, considering her question. I used to think about it all the time, what I'd do when the dust settled. But now, I don't know. I'm happy with where I am. For once, I don't feel like I have to have everything planned out. "That's a good place to be," she said, leaning her head on my shoulder. I still had moments where the past crept in, little flashes of Lisa's betrayal, the anger and hurt that had consumed me for so long. But they didn't linger the way they used to. It was like the pain had become a scar, visible, but no longer raw. One day, while cleaning out a drawer in the cabin, I found an old photo album from my marriage to Lisa. For a moment, I considered throwing it away, but instead, I sat down and flipped through it. The photos didn't hurt like I thought they would. Instead, they felt distant, like looking at someone else's life. There were happy moments in those pages, and I chose to focus on those. Lisa had been a part of my journey, but she wasn't my destination. That evening, I called my daughter, Emily, just to catch up. She'd been my biggest supporter throughout everything, always checking in to make sure I was okay. "How's life at the cabin, Dad?" she asked, her voice warm. "Peaceful," I said. "Better than I ever expected." "I'm so proud of you," she said. "I know how hard it was for you to let go of everything, but you've built something amazing for yourself." Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. For years, I'd measured my success by the stability of my marriage, the size of my house, and the weight of my responsibilities. Now, I was learning to measure it by something much simpler, my own sense of peace. As the months rolled on, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for the future. Hope for new possibilities. Hope for the man I was becoming. Rachel was a big part of that hope, but so was the work I'd done on myself. I'd spent so much time tearing myself down after Lisa's betrayal, blaming myself for not seeing the signs, for not being enough. But now, I could look in the mirror and see someone strong, resilient, and worthy of happiness. Life wasn't perfect, it never is, but it was mine, and that was enough. As I moved forward, I found myself reflecting more and more on the journey that had brought me to this point. Lisa's betrayal had felt like the end of the world when it first happened. But now, standing on the other side of it, I could see it for what it really was, a turning point. One of the biggest lessons I'd learned was about boundaries. For years, I had bent over backward to accommodate Lisa's needs, her moods, her demands. I told myself it was what a good husband was supposed to do. But looking back, I realized I had been sacrificing my own happiness to keep the peace. Never again. Rachel taught me what a healthy relationship could look like. She didn't push, didn't demand, didn't make me feel like I had to constantly prove myself. With her, I felt equal, respected and valued for who I was, not for what I could provide. That shift in perspective was life-changing. Another lesson was about trust, not just in others, but in myself. Lisa's gaslighting had made me doubt my own instincts, second-guessing every thought and feeling. But now I knew better. When something felt off, I listened to that voice inside me, and it hadn't steered me wrong since. I also learned that healing isn't a linear process. There were days when I felt on top of the world, and others when I found myself back in the shadows, haunted by memories I thought I'd buried. But each time, I pulled myself up, taking one more step toward the life I wanted. Progress, not perfection, that became my motto. There was one moment, though, that truly cemented how far I'd come. It happened at a coffee shop one afternoon. I was waiting in line when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Jake!" I turned around and there she was, Lisa. I hadn't seen her since the day she signed over the house, and the sight of her brought back a flood of memories. She looked different, tired, maybe even a little unsure of herself. "Lisa," I said, keeping my voice calm. We exchanged a few pleasantries, awkward small talk about how things were going. She mentioned she'd taken a job in another office, far from the one where her affair had blown up. She didn't mention Tom, and I didn't ask. At one point, she looked down at her coffee cup and said, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear this from, but I am sorry, Jake, for everything." Her words caught me off guard. A year ago, I would have given anything to hear her apologize. But now it felt unnecessary. I didn't need her apology anymore. "I appreciate that," I said simply. "I hope you're doing well." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "You look good. Happy." "I am," I said. And for the first time, I truly meant it. Walking out of that coffee shop, I felt an incredible sense of closure. Lisa's betrayal had broken me in ways I didn't think I could recover from. But in the process of putting myself back together, I discovered a strength I didn't know I had. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was free. Later that evening, I told Rachel about the encounter. She listened quietly, nodding as I shared how it felt to see Lisa again. "I'm proud of you," she said when I finished. "It takes a lot of strength to face something like that and walk away with grace." "Thanks," I said, pulling her into a hug. "I feel like I've finally closed that chapter. And now it's time for the next one," she said with a smile. That night, as I sat by the fire with Rachel by my side, I felt a deep sense of peace. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was mine, and I was finally ready to embrace it. With the past firmly behind me, I felt like I was finally stepping into a version of myself I could be proud of. Lisa's betrayal had been a defining moment, but it didn't define me. What mattered now was what I chose to do with the life I still had ahead of me. Rachel and I continued to grow closer, but we were careful to keep things grounded. She'd been through her own loss, and neither of us was interested in rushing towards something out of fear of being alone. Instead, we focused on building a partnership rooted in mutual respect and trust. One weekend, while we were hiking through a forest trail near my cabin, Rachel asked a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you've fully forgiven her?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. "Lisa?" I asked. She nodded. I thought about it for a moment. "Yeah," I said finally. "But forgiving her doesn't mean forgetting. I'll never forget what she did, but I also don't want to carry it around like a weight on my shoulders. She made her choices, and I've made mine. I've moved on." Rachel smiled, a look of admiration in her eyes. "That's a powerful thing to say." "It's the truth," I said. For a long time, I let her actions define how I saw myself. But not anymore. I'm finally living my life for me. One of the biggest changes I noticed in myself was how I handled relationships, romantic or otherwise. I no longer felt the need to bend over backward to please people or avoid conflict. I set boundaries, and I stuck to them. When my son, Ryan, asked if I wanted to join him for a fishing trip, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Spending that time with him reminded me of the importance of nurturing the relationships that truly mattered. "You seem lighter," Ryan said as we reeled in our lines one afternoon. "I am," I said, smiling. "I think I finally figured out what it means to let go." The woodworking business had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. Orders were pouring in, and I found myself spending hours in the shop, pouring my energy into every piece. It wasn't just about making furniture. It was about creating something meaningful out of raw, imperfect materials. One day, a customer messaged me, asking if I could create a custom dining table for their anniversary. It was the kind of challenge I thrived on, and by the time the table was finished, it was one of the best pieces I'd ever made. The customer's gratitude was overwhelming. "This is more than a table," they said. "It's a part of our family now." Hearing that brought a warmth to my chest. For so long, I'd felt like I was building a life for others, my wife, my kids, even my colleagues. Now, I was building for myself, and it felt incredible. Rachel's influence was a big part of my transformation, but I was careful not to give her all the credit. As much as she'd supported me, I knew the real work had come from within. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rachel leaned her head against my shoulder. "You've changed so much," she said. "Good or bad?" I teased. "Good," she said, smiling. "Very good. You're stronger, happier, more yourself." I kissed her forehead, feeling a sense of gratitude I hadn't felt in years. "That means a lot coming from you," I said. "You earned it," she said simply. The encounter with Lisa at the coffee shop had been the final piece of the puzzle. Seeing her again, hearing her apology, it had closed a chapter one didn't even realize was still open. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about me and the life I wanted to create. And for the first time, I felt like I was on the right path. As the anniversary of Lisa's betrayal approached, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year. It was strange to think about how far I'd come. A year ago, I'd been a broken man, consumed by anger and heartbreak, barely able to function. Now I was someone I barely recognized in the best way possible. Lisa had taken so much from me. My trust, my sense of security, the future I thought we were building together. But in a twisted way, she'd also given me something invaluable, a wake-up call. Her betrayal forced me to confront parts of myself I'd been ignoring for years. The fear of confrontation, the tendency to prioritize others over myself, the way I'd let my own needs and dreams fall to the wayside. One of the most profound lessons I'd learned was the importance of self-worth. For so long, I'd measured my value by how well I could provide for others, whether it was my family, my colleagues, or Lisa. But now, I understood that my worth wasn't tied to what I could give. It came from who I was, from my ability to stand tall even when the ground beneath me crumbled. There was also something liberating about realizing I didn't need to have all the answers. For years, I'd been obsessed with planning, controlling every aspect of my life. But life, I'd learned, was unpredictable. People change, circumstances shift, and sometimes things fall apart. The trick wasn't in trying to prevent the chaos. It was in learning how to adapt to it, how to find beauty in the mess. One evening, I sat by the fire pit outside my cabin, staring into the flames as I thought about the man I used to be. The man who had trusted Lisa implicitly, who had ignored the warning signs because he didn't want to believe the truth. I didn't hate that version of myself. He wasn't weak or naive. He was hopeful, trusting. And while that trust had been misplaced, it wasn't a flaw. If anything, it was a strength, a sign of someone who believed in love, who was willing to give his heart without reservation. The difference now was that I'd learned to balance that trust with boundaries, with an awareness of my own needs and limits. Rachel walked out onto the porch, interrupting my thoughts. She handed me a mug of tea and sat down beside me, her presence grounding me in the moment. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "The past," I admitted. "How far I've come. How much has changed." She smiled, her eyes warm. "You should be proud of yourself, Jake. Not everyone can go through what you've been through and come out stronger." "I am proud," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. As we sat there, watching the flames dance, I realized something else. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I'd built a life that felt authentic, a life that reflected who I truly was. Lisa's betrayal had been a turning point, but it wasn't the defining moment of my story. That moment was now, sitting here, at peace with myself and my journey. As I sit here today, writing this, I feel a sense of closure I never thought possible. The past year has been the most challenging of my life, but it's also been the most transformative. What started as the worst betrayal I could imagine turned into an opportunity to rebuild myself from the ground up. Lisa's betrayal, as devastating as it was, taught me lessons I'll carry for the rest of my life. I learned the importance of self-worth, the power of boundaries, and the value of resilience. I learned that it's okay to let go of the past, to forgive, not for them, but for yourself, and to embrace the possibilities of the future. But most of all, I learned that happiness isn't something you wait for, it's something you create. Rachel has been an incredible part of my journey. She didn't save me, I saved myself. But her support, kindness, and unwavering belief in me have been invaluable. She's shown me what a healthy, balanced relationship looks like. And she's reminded me that love doesn't have to be complicated or conditional. We're taking things slow, one step at a time. Maybe we'll get married someday. Maybe we won't. What matters is that we're happy in the here and now, and that's enough for both of us. The cabin has become more than just a house. It's a symbol of everything I've rebuilt. My woodworking shop is thriving. My relationships with my kids are stronger than ever, and I've even started mentoring young people in the community, teaching them the skills I've picked up along the way. It's funny how life works. What I thought was the end turned out to be a beginning. If there's one piece of advice I could give to anyone going through what I went through, it's this: you're stronger than you think. The pain feels unbearable at first, like it's going to swallow you whole. But every day, you get a little stronger. And one day, you wake up and realize you've made it through the storm. Don't be afraid to let go of the things that hurt you, even if it's terrifying. Don't settle for less than you deserve. And don't let someone else's betrayal define your worth. Life isn't perfect. It never is. But it's mine now, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Thank you for letting me share my story. If you're in the middle of your own storm, just remember, there's light on the other side. Keep moving forward. You'll find it. Stay strong.